This is a recording on April 22nd,
Me.
May 22nd. This is a recording May 22nd, 2013, about events that occurred almost 50 years ago when Fred and I were living in Gainesville. And some of what you hear will be the truth, some of what you hear will be memories, and some of what you hear may not be true at all. So the first question is, Fred, when did you and I first meet?
I don't know.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
The first memory that I have, I think, was moving into a trailer that you owned, and you were living with Ed Carlson and Miguel Robin, who was a Colombian. And I had lost the roommate that I had when he finished school. I had graduated and was going to do a master's program.
What were you studying?
I had a bachelor's degree in building construction, and I was going for a master's degree in real estate. And I needed a place to live, and your trailer was inexpensive and convenient. And so I moved in with you, and that's where the adventures began. And this probably was in the year of 1963, or no, probably 1964, which in fact would be just about 50 years ago. And some of the adventures that we had in the trailer, which became known as the
Bat Cave.
Bat Cave, and why it became the Bat Cave, I have no idea. But it was a small trailer located in a really redneck trailer park next to a unpaved airfield known as Stingle Field?
Sig.
Field.
S-C-I-G, yeah.
Sig
was
Field.
the old man who gave flying lessons.
Yeah, and so Miguel was a Colombian who we met, who was a pilot, wild and crazy man, and Ed Carlson was a lawyer who was leaving, so I took his place. So it was Miguel, Fred, and me in this trailer. And there's the adventures began, because Miguel had a sense of humor. It was a little strange. We lived next to a man named Quickie, and Quickie's trailer, they would periodically sabotage it by attaching a wooden board with a string between the two trailers, and Miguel would pull the string, which would bang a board on Quickie's trailer to wake him up.
You know, wait a minute. Quickie went on to, I think, get a PhD in economics.
Yes.
And I think he's a teacher now.
He
at
was
a university,
yeah.
a major university.
Yeah. Why was he Quickie?
Quickie, we knew all about Quickie's sex life because Quickie liked older women, and a friend of Derry had a romance with Quickie, and she was loose of tongue. And so Miguel, the devil that he was, came up with Quickie.
Devil that he was. Yes, Miguel was quite the devil. There was a story that when Ed Carlson, who was a law student, graduated, they would send investigators out to check on the background of people before they were authorized to become lawyers in Florida. So Miguel had heard that the investigators were coming to the trailer to question him about Ed Carlson's background. And of course Miguel, an overweight, 6-foot Colombian, shows up for the interview or answers the door when the investigators come, stark naked, and then proceeds to tell them that Ed Carlson was dead. And of course none of this was true, but he somehow got his law license and is now practicing law in St. Petersburg. But other adventures that occurred that I remember, there was the story of the Piper Cub that ran out of gas. And I'll let Fred tell that story.
Yeah, Tom and I were both interested in flying. Miguel had a license, so we decided to get our license, and we were student pilots. And we would go out to the field on the east side of Gainesville and rent planes after we had 10 hours flying experience. And Piper Cubs were a nice thing. And one day I decided to go flying, and I'm not exactly sure who I went with. In my mind's eye, I went with Tom Dixon, but I'm not sure that it was him. Was it you?
It wasn't me. It was somebody else.
Yeah, it wasn't Miguel that I recall.
I want to think it was Dick Powers, but
Well, it could have been, but
what happened?
in any case, we were flying towards Cedar Key, which is the west side of Gainesville. And, we pre-flighted the plane, and everything looked fine. And by that, I mean to say that there was a little cork in the gas can, which was right over the engine, that had a piece of metal that floated up with the cork, and when it was high, it told you that the tank was full. But what we did not do is to flip the top of the piece of wire. Although it looked full, we didn't realize that there were sometimes problems with just looking at the wire. So we found that out later. We got in the plane and we took off. It was a wonderful day. We lazed around clouds, and we were going on our way to Cedar Key. And as we got nearer Cedar Key, probably within 5 miles, the engine started coughing. And we looked at the wire, which now had been vibrated, and to our horror, the wire was all the way down inside. It was at its lowest extent, meaning that we were out of gas. And so, fortunately, the engine didn't conk out, but it just lost power. And we picked out a field, and in my mind's eye, of course, I was the pilot, but I can't be sure which of us was flying. And we landed in a cornfield, and as we landed, the engine conked out. We had spotted a farmhouse about maybe 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet, say a quarter of a mile, a half a mile from the cornfield. And so I walked to it, and a young lady let me use the telephone. I called Gainesville. They said, "Oh, out of gas? No problem." And I told them the address that the lady had given me. And we waited about a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, and a plane flew in with someone from the airport, the company that had rented us the plane. And they had a high-wing plane, and he had a siphon, so he siphoned gas from the high-wing plane tank down into the cowl of the Piper Cub that we were in, gassed it up, and he said, "There you are," and he got back in his plane and he took off down through the cornfield. And so I had to apologize to the young lady that we were going to take off again in his field if we were lucky, from her field, and she said, "Well, no problem, go ahead." And we took off without incident, and I don't think we messed around much. We went right back to Gainesville. So it was a short trip in terms of distance.
There was another event that occurred that was very confusing to me, and that was that sometime during the fall, in the evening, you and somebody else dropped leaflets on the campus of the University of Florida in protest. And I was never sure exactly what you were protesting, but it was always kind of scary because I was somehow involved in this mass protest demonstration. What was that all about?
I think it was probably about 1964, maybe
64, 65. Yeah, could be.
And I was in student politics at the time, even though I was in medical school. And the group of us was concerned that the Dean of Men had a strict rule that you couldn't set up tables on the campus to hand out literature. You couldn't have talks to people extemporaneously. And so there was some grumbling, especially among people who were politically active. The war was going on, civil rights was burgeoning.
What war?
The Vietnam War was
Vietnam War.
expanding.
Okay.
Yeah. So this could have been 66.
No, 65.
But
Yeah, okay.
65 is
Okay.
probable. And the Dean of Men was an old crotchety fellow who told people what to do rather than suggesting what was right or acceptable to the student body. And so we got word that the university was aware that he was an irritant, that the dean was an irritant in the student body, and realized that they just couldn't keep him out in front as a spokesperson because it was increasing the tension on the campus and actually hurting the position of the university. So we had a meeting about this, and many people were in favor of seeing the man go, but we realized that actually this fellow was doing us some good because he was swelling our membership. There were a lot of people who were angry, and we felt that if they actually fired him, that things would calm down and the issues that we were trying to press wouldn't be taken to heart by so many people. So what we decided was that if we could make a sudden public position that we wanted him fired, which of course many people did, that the university, trying to avoid the position of being dictated to by the students, would be forced to keep him. And so we thought, well, what can we do that's dramatic that makes that announcement that our organization demands that he be fired? And we decided we could distribute leaflets.
Amazing.
Miguel came up with the idea that a fellow named Clyde Dees, who had a 206 Cessna, who ran a restaurant right on University Avenue, that he might be interested in this because he was a devil-may-care kind of individual who liked daring things. He was a handball player. Miguel went to him and said, "Could you do this for us? Could you fly us over the campus?" And he said, "Sure, no problem, except it's against FAA regulations to throw stuff out of planes." So he said, "We have to do it so that the numbers on my plane are not so obvious." So we decided we'd do it at dusk one evening. So we got about 10,000, we got about 150 pounds of leaflets that demanded in strong language the resignation of the Dean of Men. And we drove out to the fellow's ranch, which was about 20 miles outside of Gainesville. He had his own private strip. We put our stuff in the plane. We had wire cutters to cut the wire off, and we took off. He had a short strip that ended with pine trees on his neighbor's property. and it was harrowing to me because I didn't know what the capabilities of this plane were, a single-engine plane. But we took off successfully, and just about, it was half light, we flew over the campus and we distributed these leaflets. Someone's student friend of mine told me that suddenly was walking along, these leaflets were falling out of the sky, and people were running around picking them. What is it? What is it? So there was an instantaneous announcement that this dean should be fired. We, meanwhile, turned around, went back to the landing strip, came over the pine trees. He couldn't have missed it by more than 5 feet. And we landed, and it was almost pitch black. I would not have been flying so late in the day. But all's well that ends well.
Speaking of ending well,
He was not fired, by the way.
you're right.
He remained the dean of men, and the next year there was a riot on campus, and the ROTC building, the ROTC building, was burned down.
Yeah, this was a period when the students were very much against the war in Vietnam. There was mandatory draft. There was a lot of unrest about why we were there and what we were doing there. So this was sort of supporting it. This was also the time of the civil rights movements. This is where I remember the University of Alabama came to play the University of Florida, and the University of Florida had a black football player, and the University of Alabama, as I remember, refused to play football because there was a black football player on the team. And it caused all kinds of angst. I don't know what they finally ended up doing because I wasn't that much of a football fan. But you talked about firing the professor. There was an event that occurred when we were been living in the trailer for a while, and at some point we decided to move out of the trailer, and we'd moved all our possessions out of the trailer, and they tried to sell the trailer, but it wouldn't sell very well. So somehow it was decided that a mysterious fire might be the thing to do. And so it was a cold evening. It was very dry. And Miguel decided that he might be able to accelerate things. So he went into the trailer and poured some cleaning material that they had left over, walked out the door, and threw a match. But what he failed to reckon with was that the gasoline fumes would flow out from the trailer. So when he lit the match, he damn near killed himself and almost blew up Quickie's trailer next door. At which point we had to find another place to live, and we moved into a house right off campus. And I remember that the criteria was that the rent that we paid individually would never exceed $50. So we were renting a house right off campus for $150 a month. And in this house, the Thanksgiving, I guess this would have been Thanksgiving celebration in 66, 67, we decided to have a pig barbecue. My father was coming up. I had relatives coming that lived in town, and we were going to barbecue this pig. And of course, none of us knew about how to barbecue pigs except Miguel. And we had a farmer friend that lived with us, or lived sometimes, would spend the night there. So he took us out to a ranch outside of Gainesville to a pig farm. And we go to the farm, and the farmer requires that you put your feet in a pan of disinfectant because he didn't want to infect his pigs. And we finally picked out a pig that looked like about the right size. And of course, Miguel, being a farmer in Columbia, knew how to weigh the pig. They put a cage on a scale and weigh it. If it weighs 20 pounds, then they put the pig in. And if the pig and the scale weigh 120 pounds, then the pig weighs 100 pounds. And of course, he knew that the trick of the deal was that when you weigh the pig, you put your foot under the scale. And I remember the farmer saying, well, wait a minute, I don't understand this. This pig weighed 100 pounds 2 weeks ago, and now it only weighs 80 pounds. And Miguel said, well, I think it just peed. I think it lost all its weight. So then we end up with a live pig in the back of this guy's truck. We then had to slaughter it and slice it up into pieces, and we hung it up in our garage at the house. So in the garage, hanging up, I guess this would have been Friday night, is this huge slabs of sliced up pig. And I knew that the barbecue was going to be Saturday afternoon, so I decided that we would need to start the fire and roast it for probably 10, 12 hours. So I took the the springs off my bed, built a fire in the driveway, put the springs on top of the fire, and then put the pig on top of the springs. The only problem was that I forgot that springs, when they get hot, lose their spring. So all of a sudden, as the fire is building up, the pig is getting closer and closer to the fire. So I quickly disassembled my bed, which had a headrest that was metal with metal bars. So I took my bed apart and turned that into a barbecue grill to cook the barbecued pig. And as I recall, it was a great success, but it was a real mess. I spent the rest of my college career sleeping on a bed that had been part of a barbecue grill. So it was.
Did you use that again?
The bed?
Yeah.
I think I did, yeah. I think I did. And in the house, Miguel somehow, I don't remember how it came about, but we ended up living with an ocelot. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do, because I remember waking up one morning, and first of all, the ocelot made me uneasy because it was a wild animal.
Now, what's an ocelot? What's it look like?
Well, it looks like a svelte, a bobcat. It probably weighed 20, 25 pounds. It was
It
like
was a big cat.
It was like
cat.
a very big cat.
Yeah.
But I remember arguing with Miguel that our house was not a good place, and I didn't like the restriction that you couldn't. You had to worry about whether the door was open or closed. He made a big point of letting us know that the animal might escape if we left the door open. I woke up one morning, and as I opened my eyes, the foot of the bed was pointed toward a closet, and there was a shelf in the upper part of the closet. And I looked up, and there was the ocelot crouched with his forepaws on the edge of the shelf, as though he were about to leap on me. And at that point, I started talking to him and gradually slid out of the bed, closed the door, went to the front door and the back door and opened them, went back to the bedroom, opened the door, got my clothes, all the time with my eye on this cat, and walked out.
That's how the cat escaped.
That's how the cat escaped.
See, my memory was that the cat loved to sit on the top of the door, just crouch there, and as you'd walk by, it would jump on your back. And so I always was just terrified, worried about it jumping on my back. But I remember that the cat disappeared, and I never really knew what happened. That was a great confession on your part. What happened to? Because everybody says, I don't know where it just disappeared.
Just disappeared.
Where did it come from?
I have no idea. I'm sure it came from South America, but how he got it in the country, who knows?
Speaking of cats, to give you some inkling of his personality, he found a stray cat at the airport, and he decided that he would adopt this cat, or at least he would find a home for this cat. And my sister Hazel was living in Gainesville at the time, and so he decided that my sister would adopt the cat. So he goes to her house, and he's packing at this point a little small pistol. And he goes to my sister's house, he knocks on the door, and he says, Hazel, would you like to adopt a cat? And she said, no. So he pulls the cat, pulls it up by its neck, points the pistol at its head, and says, well, I guess I just better shoot it right now. She proceeded to keep the cat for the next 15 years. It became known as Gatita. which is Spanish for cat. But he's found the perfect solution for having people adopt animals. You give them away or you threaten to shoot them. And he was a real character, and a lot of the things that we knew about him, I guess some of the things were true. Did you believe the story that he flew for the CIA?
He was capable of doing it. He knew how to fly. He liked adventure. He talked. We once talked about that, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did. So I don't know.
Yeah, because the story I heard was that he would periodically get on an Eastern flight, fly to Miami. When he was in Miami, he would supposedly get on an airplane. They would fly him to.
Thank you.
Fly him to Nicaragua, I think.
Yeah.
And when he landed in Nicaragua, he would get on a 206, which is a 6-passenger fast airplane, and he would fly it to Cuba and pick up and drop off supplies. And the reason was that the United States did not want to have an American pilot caught in Cuba doing this. So they paid him to fly this route. And of course he would disappear on a Wednesday or Thursday and come back on a late Monday. And he'd always have money in his pocket after he'd done this, but I was never absolutely sure that he was really doing it or he just was going to Miami for some other reason. And the stories that he tells, of course, it's always, maybe it's true and maybe it's not true. So those are some of the kinds of things that went around with him.
Huh? But that, of course, that occurred much later
Okay, round 2.
in my career.
Yeah. Fred was, at this point, a medical student at the hospital, and so we didn't see much of him, but because he was working long hours. But he told a story about, I guess, a patient or a victim, depends, who came and decided that he was a vampire. I'll let you pick up the story, Fred.
Well, I don't think he said he was a vampire. He said that he had a different kind of religion, and in order to practice his religion, he needed some of his own blood. And
That's damn near a vampire. Yeah. Okay.
And so this, of course, this came to me after the nurse came, doctor. We have this man who wants his blood drawn in a tube so he can take it home with him. So the guy must be nuts. And I said, well, let me go talk to him.
Yeah.
And so I chatted with him a little bit, and he wasn't way out. He was rational, but he wanted a sample of his own blood, and he wasn't capable of drawing it himself. I said, are you, what are you going to do with the blood? And he said, well, I'm going to take it home, and I have rituals, or I do something with it, and I might even drink part of it or eat part of it. All right. And I said, well, are you, do you have a strong stomach? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, good, because I'm going to take the blood from you right now. So I took a needle.
A big needle.
I put a tourniquet on him and put the needle in his arm, in his vein, and the blood started dripping off his elbow. And I had a tube, an open tube, and I let it drip into the tube. And I watched, as I held it, I watched his face, and I could see the blood starting to drain out of it. And we got about 10 cc's of blood in there, and I pulled the needle out and told him to hold it. It's a little messy, but his face started coming up again. And he was very, very appreciative.
Oh, I never thought you went through it. I thought he passed out and that was
Oh,
it.
no.
Oh.
I went through with it. I went through with it. I figured, what the hell?
Hey, might need the blood.
Might need the blood.
What other strange things happened at the hospital? You never told too many hospital stories.
Well, one that when I was practicing emergency medicine, late one night, fire rescue brought in a man who was dressed up with a tie, shirt, shined shoes, an elderly man, and they were doing CPR on him. And we whisked him back into major medical, and I tried to resuscitate him and couldn't. So I came out, and I asked the nurse to ask for the family of Mr. Johnson to come into the emergency, into the treatment area. And the double doors swung open, and in came a crowd of black people. There must have been 20, 30, maybe 35, well-dressed, well-manicured black people who all had a look of concern about Mr. Johnson, as though they were all part of the family. And I said, is the family of Mr. Johnson here? And 3 or 4 people came forward and said, and indicated that this is all Mr. Johnson's family. And so, rather than quibble with this, I said, I've done all that I can do, and I failed. Mr. Johnson has just passed away. I'm sorry. And with that, the whole group gave out a wail, and they started shaking and moving.
Oh, jeez. In the emergency room.
Right, and the people around me had grabbed hold of my white coat, and they started falling on the ground.
Oh my God.
And they pulled me down into this mass of people. And the nurses came running out of the nursing station, and with orders for the secretary to call the police.
Quick, call the police.
That's right. And of course the police usually hang out very near the emergency room. There's always some, and within a few minutes they were there. But meanwhile the nurses waded in,
pulled you out,
and grabbed a hold of me, 3 of them, and pulled me out of this mass of people that were they were wailing, they were giving signs of anguish, and
what were they finding? Did you find out?
They were holy rollers, and it was like a Friday night or a worship night for them. And Mr. Johnson was Reverend Johnson, who had died, and their leader. It was, it didn't hurt me in any way, and I wasn't, this was an unusual situation.
Right.
I wasn't
to say that.
I wasn't panicked, because I realized that they were acting out in their own way what they felt. They were grief-stricken.
Yeah.
But it was unusual, and it never happened before. I never then, before or since, seen holy rollers in an act of grief.
Yeah. Speaking of, when you mentioned holy rollers, I thought of a guy who we knew, who actually I think dated Fran, Burton Goldberg.
Oh yeah, Bertie.
And Bertie Wasn't he the Jewish guy that
Was
always
from New York.
from
Yeah.
New York always carried a pistol?
He liked to make you think he did.
Yeah. And the rumor that I heard was that he needed to get a certain grade to graduate from college, or to get a class grade. And he went to the professor at the end and gave him a bullet. And said, "This bullet's to make sure that I get the grade that I need." Now, I don't know if it's true, but that was the story that I heard. But Bertie loved to fish. And we would periodically get up early in the morning and go to the lakes around Gainesville and go fishing and catch bass and stuff. So one day, we decided we would fly to Venice, where I lived, and my dad had a little boat, and we would fly down to Venice, which was maybe 200 miles away, and we would fish for the day, spend the night, and then fly the plane back. Well, Miguel and I would be the pilot, and Bertie would be the passenger. And what Burton didn't know was that when you're taking off in an airplane, you don't need actually to have your hands on the steering wheel, because you steer it on the ground with your feet. So Miguel and I agreed that we would play with Bertie when we took off and argue about who was going to be the pilot. So he's sitting in the back seat, and Miguel and I are at the end of the runway, and we push the throttle full up. And then Miguel and I start arguing about who's going to, no, you fly, no, you fly, no, you fly, no, you fly. We're putting our hands up in the air. And at which point, Burton pulls out a pistol and aims it at us and says, "One of you son of a bitches fly the plane." Of course, he didn't realize that it didn't make any difference on the ground. And of course, we started flying. But he spent the whole time, poor guy, on a probably a 2-hour flight, just terrified, because we'd gotten off on really a bad foot. I think we did catch some fish and we came back, but he was a real unusual guy. But I remember he had a little man bag or something he carried.
Yeah.
Kept a little pistol just in case. I guess that was the Jewish heritage or something. I don't know, or the New York heritage. And who was the guy?
But now, I remember once we were going to fly to
Cedar Key.
No, Jacksonville. Was it Jacksonville? One time we started out at night to fly somewhere.
I remember this story. I've got a better memory of this than you do.
Well, let's hear it then.
We're going to go from Gainesville to Cedar Key, which is a trip of about 60 miles. We rented a 6-passenger airplane.
Yeah.
We invited 3 ladies and the 3 of us. I'm in the very back of the plane, which is maybe 8 feet from the front of the plane. Miguel and Fred are in the front of the plane. The 2 ladies are next, and there's a lady that's next to me. Well, when you're flying an airplane, before you take off, you set what's called the directional gyro, the DG, which basically is a compass that's not affected by the altitude or the twists and turns of the airplane. So while you're on the ground, you set the DG to north. Well, the compass says north. Well, they took off in the evening to fly to Cedar Key. We took off, and they start heading west, which is the direction of Cedar Keys. And we fly for the appropriate amount of time, and all of a sudden, there's total blackness in front of us. We crossed into the Gulf of Mexico. Fred and Miguel were befuddled about navigational stuff. So I said, "Hand me the chart." They hand me the chart, and I look up the direction of the location of what's called a VOR station, which is a way that you can know where you are. And I said, "Dial in 112.3 and tell me which direction it is." And then I drew a line on the chart, and I drew a line this way on the chart. And they had traveled 60 miles, and they were 60 miles off course. Because the DG and the wind had screwed up their compass. And I often thought, these poor ladies that we're with, I'm in the back of the plane telling the 2 guys in the front how to navigate to get back to Cedar Key. So they finally landed Cedar Key. And Cedar Key is a strange place because it has a road next to the runway. And they landed on the runway, and they thought they would turn. Normally you have a taxiway parallel to the runway. They turned off the runway to get onto the taxiway, but it wasn't a taxiway, it was a car, it was a road. And all of a sudden there's a car coming at them. They turned around and went back. And that's what I remember of the famous 60-mile off-course trip.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about a trip at night where we were going to Jacksonville, I believe, and we had to fly east and then north. We saw the airport in Jacksonville. We radioed, we got clearance to land, and
You were in
they
Palatka?
came back, and we were really in St. Augustine.
Oh, jeez. I wasn't there on that one.
And so we had to get back to flight control and
Yeah.
let them know that there was a slight misjudgment.
Yeah, I had a similar strange experience. When you're a student pilot, you want to constantly build up hours, so you're always willing to fly strange things. And the flight school in Miami had a Cessna that was on the ground and being repaired in Miami. So they asked me if I'd fly the plane back. So they flew me down there, probably on a Friday afternoon. And the idea was that I would get on the plane around 3 o'clock and fly it back to Gainesville. Well, the plane wasn't quite ready. So I waited until 5 o'clock, and it was in the evening, in the winter. And I start flying north. And as I'm flying north, I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit west of Lake Okeechobee, and I look down and I see a series of concentric rings. And then I see flying underneath me.
Crop circles.
No, a B-52 bomber. I had flown over the Avon bombing range.
Oh my God.
Highly restricted. This was during the Vietnam War, and they were training B-52 bombers to drop bombs at low level on this concentric circle Avon bombing range. So I quickly made a turn to get away from it, and I proceeded to head north to Gainesville, and it's getting dark. And the lights wouldn't come on. I had no navigational lights. I had no instrument lights. I had no lights in the cockpit whatsoever.
Oh my.
And it's getting dark. What had happened, they hadn't fixed the damn instruments. The radio, I think, worked, but none of the lights worked. So I had no interior lights at all. And I figured, what the hell? The radio worked. I'll just fly up the coast, and if it gets dark, I'm out in the Atlantic, and if it gets dark on the other side, I'm out in the Gulf of Mexico. You can't screw up too much. So I keep going up the coast, and I finally saw the white and green light of an airport, which I thought was Gainesville. So I asked Gainesville to turn on the runway lights, and nothing happens. And the guy says, "We turned on the lights." And I said, "Well, I don't see them." And I look over to my left, and way off in the distance, I can see the glow of Gainesville Airport. So I turned over and landed over there. But man, oh man, what a spooky thing. Just you got to check the plane out before you get it, but you assume if it just came out of the shop that it works. So it was quite a flying experience. But those were probably the getting lost on the way to Cedar Key, and that flight up by myself from Miami to get to Gainesville was. But your landing with the Piper Cub was pretty good too.
Lucky.
Okay, right.
Well, it was lucky that there was a field there
Yeah.
with corn that had been harvested.
Do you remember the trip that we took from Gainesville to your mother's house? And it seems like we went down the turnpike and it wasn't finished. We got lost.
Oh,
And we were drinking homemade beer.
We had 2 cars.
Yeah, he had a Chevrolet, big black Chevrolet, and I had the
Right.
Volkswagen Bug.
Right.
And I think he was taking it to Miami to put it in storage while he went home. And we ended up going to your mama's place,
Right.
Buckingham Palace.
Right.
And what's the story about the donkey and the next door neighbor at your mother's house?
Oh. Key Largo at the time was not a destination resort. It was like fishermen
And drunks.
and drunks. And we had a next door neighbor who was a nice guy, and I've forgotten his name.
He was like a Ford executive or
Joe
something.
Billings.
Yeah, Billings.
Joe Billings and his wife Norma.
Yeah.
She was always concerned about him. He was a heavy drinker, and she went away to visit family, and she came back in town, or back to Key Largo, and Joe was a mass of scratches and cuts and abrasions, and hurt all over, and was in bed. And so she, of course, assumed right away that he had gotten drunk and fallen somewhere.
Right.
And so gave him hell. And he said, "No, wait a minute, Norma." He said, "It was the horses." And she said, "What?" Joe told, and he told everybody that he was walking back from his favorite bar, and he wasn't drunk. He was sober, not totally sober, but he wasn't drunk. And he was run down by a herd of horses. And people in the neighborhood all heard this story, and now Norma is hearing this story for the first time. No one gave it any credibility until the weekly newspaper came out, and there was a police report that a small circus had been coming back north from Key West, where it was performing, and someone inadvertently opened a door on one of the vans, and 6 horses got out and stampeded down the road. It didn't include anything about Joe,
Yeah.
but the concurrence of the two things were enough for people to start thinking that it must be true.
Whoa. But then he got attacked by pelicans later?
You know, he always, I don't recall a pelican story.
See, I thought he promised never to drink if she left town, and she had to go to Miami for something, and then he decided he would stay home and be good, and he went fishing on the dock, and he hooked a pelican, and the pelican beat him up. So when she came home, he was again accused of being drunk, and he said, "No, I wasn't. It was a pelican," and she didn't believe a pelican did it to him.
Yeah, I heard that story from my mom, but I didn't talk to Joe about it. But I did talk to Joe about
The horses.
the horses. Yeah.
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 Only in Key West. Key Largo.
Yeah.
But that was quite. Your mom. She had rental units. Blue Pelican, was that?
No.
She had Buckingham Palace.
Well, she had 2 pieces of property down there. One. What the hell were the names of them?
I thought it was Blue Pelican. One was Buckingham Palace, where she lived.
Right. It'll come to me in
Yeah.
a minute here. I don't think that she had any relatives there. Of course, we owned a motel in West Hollywood.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Uh,
I'm sure. And they had a dog, Charlie de Gaulle,
right.
which was a Chihuahua that would come out and attack you.
Yeah. She had a series of Chihuahuas. She liked little dogs but they were all mean,
Yeah. In fact,
invariably.
Millie, Fred's mother, married Linda and I. She signed the notary public
Right.
that made Linda and I in our marriage.
And didn't you get married in my sister's house?
No.
Where was the?
Yeah, I married in your sister's
Yeah,
house or
yeah.
your mother's house?
My sister's house in
In Coconut
Coconut Grove.
That was your sister's house?
Yeah, on the corner of Mary Street.
And Day.
Day.
Day and Mary. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's where we got married. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was 1973.
Really.
1973, yeah. So what other stories do you remember that you
And
would
so
like your
then you
like your
marry-
son to know about in Gainesville,
Mm.
or maybe you don't want him to know about?
Well, most of them I don't want them to know about.
Were you there when we went to somebody's house and ate gator tail and boiled peanuts and gator tail and drank homemade beer? Maybe that wasn't you.
No, I don't remember that, but I do remember going with a friend, a medical student, Jeff. I've forgotten his last name. Went out to his trailer and we started drinking bourbon,
Yeah.
and we got pretty lost
Yeah.
on the bourbon, and he insisted on bringing me down to see his friend Red. And as we drove down this dirt road, he told me about Red, who was like his hero. And Red was, it turned out, was an alligator hunter,
Oh, okay.
and who he'd drink beer with. And Red had a mountain of empty beer cans behind his
House.
little shack. And he was a dissolute character.
Was he the one you went frog hunting with?
No. That was a medical student, Steve Shang, who became a cardiologist in Pensacola. But he taught me, he and I used to go out frog hunting at night with
Okay.
a miner's
Yeah.
lamp on
A long
your head,
spear.
right? A gig, like
Yeah.
maybe a 6 or 8 foot gig,
Mm-hmm.
and he taught me how to look for the eyes of the frog.
Right.
And the eyes of the frog were about that far apart, but you had to be careful about eyes that were about that far apart, because those were the snakes, the
Oh,
water
you're talking about-
moccasins
wow.
or other water snakes. And
And
the eyes of
those
the
are
alligators,
alligators
which
that
could
far
be
apart.
about that far apart.
So there's a
right?
discrimination.
Yeah. So,
When did Nancy?
but we always used to get a whole bag full of frogs.
Yeah.
And then chow down on frog legs.
Yeah. Speaking of chowing down, Tommy Burton, who was a redneck,
Very much so.
and he would periodically stay with us when we lived in the house. Actually, I think he slept in the driveway in his car, but he taught animal science. He taught the students how to take a cow and cut it up into different
Right.
pieces. And I remember he would always bring what he said was the best part of the cow, which was livers and hearts and all the
Kidneys.
kidneys and all this stuff.
Right.
And we used to say to
Livers,
him,
hearts, and kidneys.
and we'd say, Bertie, bring us the filet mignons, bring us the, no, that's not the good stuff. So he would chop these up and
Right.
cook these things. But he was just a bow-legged redneck, but he was the guy that knew the farmer that had the pig,
Oh, they got you connected.
that
up
got
to the
connected to the pig for the pig roast, yeah. And I remember riding in the back, it was his truck that we used to bring this pig back
Yeah.
for the famous pig barbecue, but it was Tom Burton, yeah. And he was good friends with Miguel.
Yeah. And Tom married a woman from El Salvador.
Or somewhere, yeah.
Yeah.
When did Nancy come in to the picture?
Nancy Lattimore was a medical student in the class behind me,
Okay,
and I got to know her,
yeah.
and I introduced her to Miguel.
Wow.
They hit it off.
Yeah.
They got married. Nancy went to Columbia.
Did they get married in Gainesville? I think it may have been in St. Pete or Doomday.
I don't think I was at their wedding.
I don't think I was either.
Yeah,
Yeah. But then she learned Spanish, went to Columbia and
right.
lived there for, I guess, 15,
She
20
was
years.
a gutsy girl.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, to do that, to pick up and go to a foreign country,
right.
to live with this wild, crazy man.
Right, and she I think, was licensed to practice medicine in Columbia.
Wow.
I think she practiced there for a while, but she found it difficult because of the language.
Yeah.
She,
She was a psychologist.
She was more of a, she was a therapist.
As Miguel would call her, she was a spook doctor.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is difficult to translate. You have to kind of grow up in a culture to
Understand what bothers you psychologically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was quite a thing for her to do that.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about the Keys and Fred's mom, who married us, and she was just a wonderful lady. But there's a story that, in the 60s, marijuana smoking and drugs and things were starting to come into its own. And at some point, it was decided, I don't know by whom, that Millie, Fred's mother, should have a little experience with not psychedelic drugs, but some marijuana. And so, what happened, Fred?
Well, my sister and I were there to visit Mom, and this is probably, I don't know, 1965, maybe,
Yeah.
66.
Yeah.
And Franny, we were sitting at the kitchen table, and the conversation came around to, my mom asked, Franny, have you ever smoked marijuana? And Franny said, well, yes, Mom. And then she turned and looked at me and she said,
And you, Fred?
and you, Fred, have you ever tried marijuana? And I said, yeah, I have, Mom.
Yeah.
And so she said, well, what's it like? And so Franny gave her version.
Yeah.
Makes you feel light and happy, and makes you hungry sometimes, and makes you feel sociable. And so my mom offhandedly said, well, that sounds pretty nice. And Franny said, would you like to try some? And my mom said, you mean you have some? And she said, yeah. And she hesitated just for a second, and she said, well, yeah, I'd like to try some. And so we said, all right, well, it was about maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and we were sitting in the kitchen in the house in Key Largo. And so she, Franny went in the bedroom, brought out her stash, and showed Mom how to
Roll a joint?
Roll a joint. She rolled a joint. We lit it up,
Yeah.
and we started passing it around, And so after about 10 minutes, Mom said, "Oh," she said, I'm starting to feel it." She said, "Oh, this is nice." And so we started talking back and forth. She was laughing. She was, we were having a good time. And suddenly, there was a
knock
strong
at the door,
knock on the door, like a policeman might knock,
Yeah.
a heavy,
Yeah.
authoritative knock. And we looked at each other in panic.
Right.
Franny grabbed the stash and started putting it away. My mom says, "Who is it?" And a deep lady's voice at the door says, "Is that you, Millie? I hear people in there with you. Are you okay?" And I look at my mom thinking, Christ, if she
Comes in here.
is paralyzed by any kind of weird marijuana reaction,
Right.
I could see her blowing this scene,
Right. Yeah.
And so I smiled and I went, "Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mom, talk to her." And she said, "Yeah," and I forgot the lady's name, but it turned out that she was a real estate lady. She and her husband sold real estate. He had a very high squeaky voice.
Mm-hmm.
She had a very low diesel dyke kind
Right.
of voice. And Mom says, assuming her name is Mary,
Yeah.
says, "Oh yeah, Mary, my son and daughter are here with me, and we're just laughing about things." And so Mary comes back and says, "Well, I'm just checking on you, Millie, because there's some drug-crazed people running around this island." And everybody kind of grabbed the arms of their chair like, "Oh boy,
That's
this
funny.
could go in the wrong place." And so my mom came back with great peace of mind and said, "No, Mayor, we're doing just fine. Thank you for checking on me."
Wow.
And I sank in the chair.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's about the rain.
Yeah, I'm gonna